book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unmaking the Presidency, Donald Trump's War on the World's Most Powerful Office by Susan Hennessy and Benjamin Witz. And this is from the introduction, page 5. They've described how, all the former presidents, with the exception of Herbert Walker Bush, who was ill, were there for Trump's inauguration, as well as Secretary Clinton and her husband, Bill Clinton. And then he continues. The clock mounted down to the key moment shortly before noon when Donald Trump stood before Chief Justice John Roberts. Trump's wife, Melania, held 2 Bibles on which he placed his left hand. One was from Trump's childhood. The other was the Bible that Abraham Lincoln used to take his oath of office in 1861. And then Trump raised his right hand and, repeating after Roberts, swore the presidential oath of office. A momentary silence hung in the air. No lightning bolt struck. The ground did not open. The passage of power in the United States had taken place as quietly as ever. Yet in that moment, an earthquake of sorts did occur, because although the United States may have had more tragically misguided executives at its helm, never before had it had as president a man more obviously misplaced in the office. The mismatch reverberated across the country with the very words of the oath itself. While for millions of Trump supporters, the moment was one of triumph, for a great many others, a sense of dread pervaded the air that morning. This dread had little to do with politics or policy programs. It was not the normal apprehension one might have at the swearing in of a politician one opposes. Even many people who had cast their ballots for Trump shared in a collective recognition that the man swearing this oath was simply not the sort of man who was supposed to be President of the United States. That mismatch and the challenge it poses to the office Trump assumed that day are the subjects of this book. This mismatch is fundamentally a question of character. At its core, to a far greater degree than Americans commonly imagine, the office of the presidency depends on a measure of civic virtue. We don't mean civic virtue in the loftier, nostalgic sense of expecting our elected leaders to be scholars, statesmen who can theorize a system of government as easily as they can lead one. Nor do we mean virtue in the sense of personal righteousness and purity. Americans have long since given up the expectation that our country's leaders will be on a par with its founders, even as the founders' own luster has tarnished over time. The presidency has had its share of rogues and villains and incompetence. That said, a certain common understanding of the presidency has prevailed over more than 2 centuries. And this understanding, call it the traditional presidency, carries with it certain expectations. It does not expect presidents to be paragons of virtue, but it does expect them to espouse shared values and to at least pose as role models. It expects presidents to speak of service and putting others before self. It expects presidents to, at a minimum, pay lip service to following the law and embracing an ethos of civic duty. And it pervasively depends on presidents thinking that they enforce and comply with rules in good faith. By contrast, it was resoundingly clear on January 20th, 2017, that Donald Trump's life and candidacy were an ongoing rejection of civic virtue, even if we define the term loosely. From the earliest days of his campaign, he declared war on the traditional presidency's expectations of behavior. He was flagrant in his personal immorality, boasting of marital infidelity and belittling political opponents with lewd insults. He had constructed his entire professional identity around gold-plated excess and luxury and the branding of self. As a candidate, he remained unabashed in his greed and personal ambition. Even his namesake charitable foundation was revealed to be merely a shell for self-dealing. He bragged that finding ways to avoid paying taxes made him smart. The overriding message of Trump's life and of his campaign was that kindness is weakness, manners are for wimps, and the public interest is for suckers. He never spoke of the presidential office other than as an extension of himself. In America in 2016, that turned out to be a winning message. The reasons why have been treated in depth elsewhere. It was a function of political polarization domestically, of myriad forces driving the appeal of authoritarian populists globally, and of the dramatic loss of confidence in political elites, and of a media ecosystem in which voters can increasingly choose their own realities. It was a function, no doubt, of the resurgence of race as a salient political identity for many white voters. And critically for present purposes, it was a function of political parties' loss of control over their own nominating processes. We'll leave to others the question of how to assess Trump's appeal and the social conditions that allow him to flourish. The relevant fact for now is that the appeal was broad enough for Trump to win 306 electoral votes and thus acquire the privilege of taking the oath of office that day. And so a man who quite proudly rejected personal and public virtue now occupied an office designed by people who valued nothing higher. George Washington had said that, quote, virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. John Adams had insisted that public virtue, quote, the only foundation of republics, could not exist in a nation without private virtue. Alexander Hamilton had written that virtue and honor were the foundation of confidence that underpinned the institution of delegated power. The contemporary Anglo-Irish philosopher Edmund Burke had famously declared that, quote, society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon will and appetite be placed somewhere. Unmaking the Presidency by Hennessy and Wittis. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's you know, as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Tuesday. I'm broadcasting today again live from San Francisco. After I get off the air, I'm catching a flight to Seattle because we'll be broadcasting tomorrow from KBCS, our Pacifica affiliate in Seattle, where we'll be doing the show live tomorrow and Thursday morning. And tomorrow night, I'll be at Seattle Town Hall at 7:30 p.m. And tickets are available at thomhartmann.com. Well, there's a link to where the tickets are available. Town Hall is putting the thing on. And Sunday of this coming weekend, the 23rd, February 23rd, I'll be in Minneapolis for the Blue State Ball. The information there, ktnf.com, or there's a link to it again on my website at thomhartmann.com. Friday the 28th, a week from Friday, I'll be at Powell's in Portland, the flagship location on Burnside. That's going to be a lot of fun. That'll be at 7:30 p.m. And Sunday, March 1st, we're 2 weeks down the road here, I believe. I'll be in Chicago at Frugal Muse Books out in Darien. I've been there many times, and Paul, the guy who runs the bookstore, is a great guy, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So the book tour rolls on. I was on Crystal Ball's show this morning on Hill TV. The message that I'm trying to share, I've told you a few times, is this essential message that the only way Republicans have gotten the White House in 2000 and 2016 with George W. Bush and Donald Trump, and the only way probably a half a dozen Republican members of the Senate and probably 30 or 40 Republican members of the House of Representatives, the only way that they're there is because of voter suppression. This massive voter suppression campaign, George Bush and Jeb Bush kicked this thing off in 2000 in Florida by using the Texas felon list to push 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls in Florida. That created a huge uproar. So in 2002, they passed a law, the Help America Vote Act, that created this thing called provisional ballots. Where when people are pushed off the voting rolls, they still show up, they're given a ballot, they think they voted. That's why they walk out and tell the exit pollster, yeah, I voted for Hillary Clinton. And that's why almost, according to the exit polls, Hillary Clinton won Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and 2 of those states she won by about 6%, according to the exit polls. But the official count after all these people were purged and after all these provisional ballots that were not even opened, much less counted, were just stuck in a box someplace, yeah, magically Donald Trump wins, and Rick Scott goes to the Senate, and Andrew Gillum loses, and Stacey Abrams loses, and all of those losses, all those Democratic losses in 2016 and 2018 were entirely caused by voter suppression. And as you and I are speaking right now in red states all across the country, this is not happening in states with Democratic secretaries of state. This is a totally partisan thing. But right now, as you and I are speaking in red states across the country, secretaries of state are purging people from the vote, particularly in large cities, particularly in cities with large black populations. Even in Georgia, for example, even in rural areas that have large black populations, purging the vote like crazy, reducing the number of voting stations. Brian Kemp closed more than 200 voting stations just in time for his election against Stacey Abrams in 2018. These people are illegitimate. This is, in my opinion, criminal. If it's not criminal by law, and I believe it is, frankly, it's also criminal by morality. The 14th Amendment, Article 2 of the 14th Amendment, explicitly says that if a state suppresses a legitimate vote, if a state prevents people from voting who have a right to vote, the state starts losing members of the House of Representatives. Now, I just learned this a couple days ago. It should be in my book, right? It should be a whole chapter, but I didn't know it at the time. I've read the 14th Amendment. I wrote a whole damn book about the 14th Amendment called Unequal Protection, and somehow I missed that. When you read the language of Article 2 of the 14th Amendment, it gets kind of obscure, but there it is. And I'm thinking that Georgia should lose one of their members of the House. And some of these other right-wing red states too. Ohio, you guys don't. I mean, if you suppress 580,000 votes in Georgia, that's at least one and maybe two congressional districts, and therefore they should have two fewer members of Congress, in my opinion. So, anyhow, but I also wanted to talk here in the first hour about accountability. There's hot stuff going on right now. The Federal Judges Association. This is it's a nonprofit organization, with a board of directors and membership, and pretty much all the federal judges are members. It's not a partisan organization. It's not like the Federalist Society that's nothing but right-wingers. And it's not like the Trial Lawyers Association that's pretty much mostly left-wingers. This is the Federal Judges Association, the FJA. And they have an annual meeting where they just get together and they have educational seminars and workshops. And you've seen these things in hotels, where you have the conference and they have breakout sessions and panels and, what's the state of the art here and what's the latest on how effective DNA testing is, or what is the evidence for eyewitnesses, that kind of stuff. The stuff that judges and subtleties of the law and what the Supreme Court just did, and bringing people up to speed on how things have changed as a result of legislation and Supreme Court decisions. For you and me, a very boring organization, and they've been around for years and years and years. And their annual meeting is slated for April 18 and 19. But they are having an emergency meeting today, as we speak. Not the entire association, just the board of directors. But, they are freaked out. In fact, that might even be putting it mildly. And they are freaked out by cover-up General Bill Barr. I love using, William Safire back in 1991 and 1992 called him cover-up General Barr because he covered up the Iraq WMD scandal, it was called then. It was called Iraq-gate, where the Reagan administration illegally sold poison gas to Saddam Hussein that he then used against the Iranians in that war. And Bill Barr covered that up. He shut down the investigation as Attorney General. Oh, we're not going to investigate that. Well, yeah, it's a crime. It's a crime in the United States. It's a crime internationally. But we're not going to investigate it. Just like he shut down 6 separate investigations of Donald Trump when he became Attorney General. There's 6 ongoing investigations. He shut them down. He's shutting down investigations left and right. And and of course the Roger Stone stuff is at the top of everybody's mind, and now he's meddling in the Mike Flynn case, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. It looks like Deutsche Bank was on the verge of being prosecuted by the Obama administration for money laundering Russian money that ended up in the pockets of Donald Trump. And Bill Barr comes into office, Donald Trump comes into office. Bill Barr came a little later. Donald Trump comes into office, and suddenly the Justice Department isn't doing the investigation anymore. And Deutsche Bank is just going, oh, hey, this is kind of cool. A whole year goes by. And the guy who was at the top of that pyramid, by the way, was Justin Kennedy, who was the son of Anthony Kennedy, the Supreme Court Justice. And then Trump makes this crack to Anthony Kennedy about say hi to your boy for me. And Anthony Kennedy says, well, I guess I'll resign from the Supreme Court and make way for Brett Kavanaugh. And of course, Anthony Kennedy was the guy who was in favor of gay marriage, and he was the guy who was in favor of abortion rights for women, even though he was a Republican and a right-wing voter on, things like trashing unions and reducing regulation, for pollution and letting corporations put more poison in the air and more pesticides and all this kind of stuff. I mean, Anthony Kennedy was an old-fashioned Republican, right? He was a George Herbert Walker Bush Republican who was kind of liberal on a few social issues like women and gays, and on everything else was, right. Well, he's been replaced by Brett Kavanaugh, who's a fundamentalist Catholic. We now have, 6 Catholics on the court, I think, and 5 of them are like Opus Dei Catholics. Sonia Sotomayor is not. This is mind-boggling. How do we hold these guys to account? And do you think Barr will ever be held to account?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And just to put a period on that, 2,000 former federal prosecutors have come out and said Barr needs to be impeached or resign. And welcome back. Whew, what a day, huh? I mean, what an extraordinary day, week, year, lifetime. I don't know where to begin. It's just going on and on and on. Let me put this into talent mode, and let's see who's here. Amy in Kokomo, Indiana. Hey, Amy, what's on your mind today?
Hello, I was watching David Pakman, and he was talking about that the Republicans are sending out fake censuses, and the clue was like they're asking if you just at their support for Trump and stuff. I just want everyone to know about this and stuff, so they make sure that this is out there.
Yes, well, good on you, Amy. And it's true. The GOP or one of the groups is affiliated with them. I haven't had one in my hand, so I can't tell you that. But I have seen images on them on the internet on multiple places. It's people have tweeted it to me. Somebody posted one on our Facebook page, and of course I've seen them on news sites. And I think there might be 2 things going on here. If they're selectively sending them to swing voters and Democrats rather than Republicans, many people might fill them out, send them in, and think, okay, I've taken the census. And then when the census taker comes around, they'll just say, oh, I'm good, I've already taken it. And so they don't get counted. Or secondly, people will fill it out, send it back in, and now the Republican Party has their address and mailing address and their personal information and all kinds of stuff to build into their database to go after them, whether they're going after them on Facebook or whether, whatever it may be. And third, they're just adding general confusion to the thing because they want to. This census is really important. It's going to determine federal aid to local communities and to states, the amount of federal aid that they get. So if they can get an undercount in communities of color, Hispanics and African Americans, but they're particularly targeting Hispanic communities now, because that's the fastest growing demographic in the United States right now, and it is heavily Democratic. And if they can target the Hispanic vote and basically knock it out, then or the Hispanic citizens and voters and knock them out of the census, then there will be fewer resources for them, and there may even be less representation. We may see a reduction in the number of members of the House of Representatives from states that have heavy Hispanic populations as a result of this. So the census is a big deal. And then, of course, congressional districts are drawn based on the census. The census is every year that ends with a 0, every 10 years. And then over the next year or two, the states take that census information and they redraw their congressional boundaries. And, this just ain't a good thing. I don't know how to say it beyond that. It just ain't a good thing. Thank you very much, Amy, for the heads up on that. John in Claremore, Oklahoma. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm calling, Tom. I've been trying to dig up some information about the early Bill Clinton first term. They passed an economic plan, a tax plan, that worked really well for several years, produced a surplus, and raised possibilities of doing something about the national debt.
Clinton raised taxes. The Republicans all said it was going to throw us into a depression, and instead it goosed the economy.
That elected Joe on Morning Joe, didn't it? That in his district, wherever he was, he said, "Oh, they raised taxes, elect me." Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, they raised taxes all over the country.
Are you aware of anything that's been written about that to kind of summarize it and put it together?
Well, back in the day, I remember there was a lot of commentary about, how the Republicans had made all these threats and warnings, and not only did they not come true, it was the exact opposite. I haven't seen anything recently, John, but I'm guessing that, plug it into the search engine in the New York Times or plug it into DuckDuckGo and you'll probably find it. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video up over at Thom Hartmann. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. Bill Barr, this is just an amazing story. And what really amazes me, the article, I tweeted this article out yesterday or the day before, I think. And so it should be in my Twitter feed if you look at my tweets. A link to it. It was an article on Salon. It was also picked up on Raw Story and Common Dreams and Alternet and whatnot, most of the progressive media out there. And I was pointing out that Bill Barr's history really started in 91, 92 when George Herbert Walker Bush, G.H.W. Bush, made him the Attorney General of the United States. And then he covered up Iraq-gate, the weapons of mass destruction scandal, and he covered up the Iran-Contra deal, which officially had to do with hostages being held in Lebanon and the U.S. government, the Reagan administration, sending arms to Iran to get them to influence Hezbollah to let those American hostages in Lebanon go. But the weird thing about that is that we started sending weapons to Israel in 1981, and that hostage seizure happened in like 85, 84, 83, somewhere in there. And so, most of us, you just look at the timeline and it's fairly obvious. We were sending weapons to Israel. In fact, we started, it wasn't weapons, it was spare tires for F-15s. We were transshipping them through Israel in the fall of 1980 before the election was even held. So this was the beginning of the payoff to Iran to say thank you very much for holding the hostages so that Jimmy Carter will lose the election and Ronnie Reagan can become president. And so that scandal was covered up in 1992 by Bill Barr also. Bill Barr, in a famous interview a few years in 2000, at one of these universities, they're doing these oral histories of presidencies, and they were doing the oral history of the Bush presidents, the first Bush presidency. And, they asked him about it. They said, in 92, George Bush pardoned Caspar Weinberger and Ollie North and Elliott Abrams. And, these 5 guys, 3 of them had been convicted. 5 of them were set to go to prison for the Iran-Contra deal. And Bush pardoned all of them, which blew apart the ongoing prosecution, which could have led to George Bush. This was because at that point in time, they were about to, or they had already, Lawrence Walsh had subpoenaed George Bush's, the elder's, diaries, his campaign diaries and his, where he was every day, his official diary of where he was and what he was doing. And it would have shown, particularly if it went back to the early 80s, it would have shown his meetings with people that had to do with shipping weapons to Iran, his personal involvement with Iran-Contra. And not to mention Iraq-gate, to the deals. I mean, you've all seen the picture of Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. That was during the Reagan administration. It was in the late 80s. And so who rides to the rescue? Well, Bill Barr says, well, George Bush said, what should we do about this? And should we pardon Caspar Weinberger, Cap Weinberger, one of the top administration officials in the Reagan and Bush administration. In fact, I think he was defense secretary. He was high up there, whatever it was. And Bill Barr said, in for a pound, in for a penny, in for a pound. That's the quote. You can read it in my article. And, the interviewer said, well, what does that mean? He says, pardon all of them. Shut the whole investigation down. Kill the whole thing, which is what they did. And so on Christmas Day in 1992, 3 weeks before Bill Clinton was about to be installed as president, inaugurated in Washington, D.C., and about 7 weeks after the election, when Bill Clinton beat George H.W. Bush, Bush pardons all these people, and the screaming headline in the New York Times is, cover up, right? Bill Barr's cover up. Bill Barr's name wasn't in the headline, but it's certainly in the article. Cover up. Lawrence Walsh decries cover up. Bush pardons 5, shuts down Iran-Contra investigation, or words to that effect. You can find it if you're a New York Times subscriber. Just go back and look at the front page of the paper on the 24th and 25th of December of 1992. It will blow your mind. So, that is what's going on. And now you've got people like David Ayer. He was a deputy attorney general under Barr in the George H.W. Bush administration. So this was Barr's assistant 28 years ago when Barr was covering up the Iran-Contra scandal and the Iraq scandal, and he said, and I quote, "Bad as they are, these examples are more symptoms than causes of Barr's unfitness for office. The fundamental problem is that Barr does not believe in the central tenet of our system of government, that no person is above the law. In chilling terms, Barr's own words make clear his long-held belief in the need for a virtually autocratic executive who is not constrained by countervailing powers within our government under the constitutional system of checks and balances. Indeed, given our faith and trust in the rule of law no one can subvert, it is not too strong to say," now this is Bill Barr's former assistant, "it is not too strong to say that Bill Barr is un-American. And now from his perch as Attorney General, he's in the midst of the root and branch attack on the core principles that have guided our justice system, and especially our Department of Justice, since the 1970s.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Barr, of course, doesn't give a rat's ass. He doesn't care what anybody says about him. He's already did an interview where he said, when I'm dead, I'm dead. I don't care what they say about me. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato. And this is from the introduction titled Thinking Big Again. Across the globe, countries, including in the developing world, look to emulate the success of the U.S. economy. In doing so, they look at the power of, quote, market-driven, end quote, mechanisms versus what might seem like old-style state-driven mechanisms in places like Europe or the ex-Soviet Union. But the United States is not what it seems. The preacher of the small state, free market doctrine has for decades been directing large public investment programs in technology and innovation that underlie its past and current economic success. From the internet to biotech and even shale gas, the U.S. state has been the key driver of innovation-led growth, willing to invest in the most uncertain phase in the innovation cycle and let business hop on for the easier ride down the way. If the rest of the world wants to emulate the U.S. model, they should do as the United States actually did, not as it says it did. More state, not less. A key part of this lesson should be to learn how to organize, direct, and evaluate state investments so that they can be strategic, flexible, and mission-oriented. Only in this way will top minds find it an honor to work for the state. This is something that needs to be understood not only by the rest of the world, but in the United States itself, where the dominant political narrative is endangering funding for future innovation and economic growth. In 2013, U.S. government spending for basic research fell below what it was a decade earlier, and most likely will continue to fall due to congressional gridlock over the public budget. Rather than static discussions about the size of the deficit, there must be more debate about its actual composition, how to invest strategically in key areas such as research and development, R&D, education, and human capital formation that will increase gross domestic product, the GDP, in the future, bringing the debt-GDP ratio down as a consequence. And how to engage in a debate about the direction of change so that such investments will lead to growth that is not only smarter, that is innovation-led, but also more inclusive and sustainable. These issues are urgent with the upcoming 2016 U.S. presidential election, which could, if properly informed, change the parameters of the current static debate. The United States desperately needs politicians with the courage to swim against the tide of popular rhetoric and outline a bolder vision for the state's dynamic role in fostering the economic growth of the future. In emerging economies such as China, the public sector is indeed investing billions in green technologies with the expectation that these industries will be the engines of future growth. The United States could take inspiration from its own history. In 1961, an American president set out a bold, ambitious, and risky mission to send a man to the moon. Who will have the courage to set out a new vision for America today? Addressing today's societal challenges, for example, those around climate change, requires a vision, a mission, and most of all, confidence about the state's role in the economy. As eloquently argued by Keynes in The End of Laissez-Faire in 1926, the important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. End of quote. This, however, requires the public sector to have vision and confidence, increasingly missing today. Why? What is the role of the public sector in economic growth? After the financial crisis, with public budgets bloated, mainly due to their role in saving the private sector, across the globe we are hearing that in order for nations to be competitive, innovative, and dynamic, we must have more market and less state. As at best we are told, governments merely facilitate the economic dynamism of the private sector. At worst, their lumbering, heavy-handed, and bureaucratic institutions actively inhibit it. The fast-moving, risk-loving, and pioneering private sector, by contrast, is what really drives the type of innovation that creates economic growth. According to this view, the secret behind an engine of innovation like Silicon Valley lies in its entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. The state can intervene in the economy, but only to fix market failures or to level the playing field. It can regulate the private sector in order to account for the external costs companies may impose on the public, like pollution, and it can invest in public goods, such as basic scientific research or the development of drugs with little market potential. To some on the political right, even fixing market failures would be a sin, because such attempts would lead to worse outcomes in the form of government failures. What all these views have in common is the assumption that the state should stick to fixing markets, not directly try to create and shape them. A 2012 Economist article on the future of manufacturing encapsulates this common misperception. This book is committed to dismantling this false image, which underpins a global trend promoted by conservative economists, politicians, and the media of bashing and diminishing the importance of the state. It focuses on what Tony Jute called a discursive battle. How we talk about the state matters. Depicting private business as the innovative force while the state is cast as the inertial one, necessary for the basics but too large and heavy to be the dynamic engine, is a description that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to depict the state, continues. So the book is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. There's a few other stories that are in the news that are worthy of comment, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. Donald Trump has been taking money that Congress did not appropriate for the wall. They refused to do that, but he's taking it out of the federal budget, out of the military budget, the Pentagon budget, by declaring a state of emergency. Now, there is no emergency. Immigration to the United States is lower than it has been in decades. We do have a refugee problem, but even that has not, surged recently. There is no emergency, but by declaring a state of emergency, he gains all kinds of powers that he doesn't have otherwise. And so he declared this kind of limited state of emergency, limited to the Southwest, so that he could militarize the border, he could send troops down there, and also now he has used that state of emergency to suspend the environmental protection laws. So they're going through Native American burial grounds, they're going through sacred sites, the tribes are not consulted on this. The tribes are ignored on this. They're taking land away from farmers along the Texas border. A whole lot of good Republican Texas ranchers are seriously upset, and they're building this wall, as aggressively as they can, so that he can claim victory when he runs for re-election in 2016. I kept you safe from the brown people, all you white people in the Midwest, and that's going to be his sales pitch. But not only has he blown up the environmental protection laws, now we discover he's blown up the federal law that requires that when the federal government buys something, it get competitive bids from 2 or more companies so that it pays the lowest price. And he's saying, screw that. Find some Republican donating contractor and just give them the bid. These are no bid contracts. This is, by the way, what Bush and Cheney did with the Iraq War. Is they said, competition, we don't need no stinking competition. Meanwhile, and Gabe Ortiz, who's just such a brilliant guy, he's writing about this over at dailycoast.com. The story is horrifying. Under severe pressure, the department, the Border Patrol guys and whichever particular department is responsible for holding these kids in these jails, these so-called detention centers, these children's prisons, has had to send in therapists, psychotherapists, psychologists, psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, to sit with the kids and help them work through the trauma of being torn away from their parents at the age of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, or even in their early teen years, from being torn away from their parents and being stuck in a jail cell for, in the case of this one kid that is the kind of the poster child for this, 900 days. And, can you imagine being 12 years old and being put in prison for 900 days for almost 3 years? So anyhow, the therapist sits with them and says, you can just pour out your guts to me. You can tell me what you're afraid of. You can tell me about your past. I can get to know you. It's all confidential. Don't worry. Our industry has ethical standards. And the kids do this. They pour out their guts to the therapists and give them information like who their parents are and where they are and where their relatives are in the United States who may or may not be documented. And now it turns out that these therapists have been turning these notes over to ICE. And ICE is using this information to go after these kids' relatives. And they're coming into these towns, these so-called sanctuary cities, with SWAT teams, with guys dressed like, military out of Iraq, with face masks and giant mutant ninja turtle black suits with, knee protectors and arm protectors and bulletproof vests and in giant trucks and with military assault style weapons and just rushing up and crashing down doors and busting windows and charging into houses. And the American Psychological Association is going, what the hell? The president of the American Psychological Association just condemned Donald Trump's weaponizing, his word, the word of the president of the APA, weaponizing of confidential therapy sessions notes against detained migrant children in the U.S. He said the Office of Refugee Resettlement, these are not kids who they or their parents are looking for a better life in America economically. These are people who are fleeing rape, robbery, pillaging, being forced into gangs, all this kind of stuff. He said that the Office of Refugee Settlements, quote, sharing of confidential therapy notes of traumatized children destroys the bond of trust between patient and therapist that is vital to helping the patient. We call on the Office of Refugee Resettlement to stop this practice immediately, and that the Department of Health and Human Services and Congress to investigate its prevalence. This was Sandra Schulman, PhD, the president of the American Psychological Association. She went on to say, we also call on ICE to release any immigrants who have had their asylum requests denied as a result of these notes taken by therapists. This is a big deal. And let me tell you why I think it's an even bigger deal than that. If the federal government can say to therapists, you will give us our notes, your notes, from that therapy session. What's going to happen when they decide that you, who may be an activist, a progressive activist, somebody who's signed a petition, somebody who showed up at a rally and you had your picture taken with facial ID, the FBI now knows who you are. And that's the Trump Barr administration, right? And Pence. And so they channel that information to wherever it may be, apparently HHS, and somebody with a gold badge, a gold star and a black billfold shows up at the office of your therapist and says, I need the notes from your conversations with Jane Smith last year when you were talking to her because she was involved in an anti-war protest or an anti-Trump protest or the Pink Hat Women's March with the Pussy Hats or whatever it may be. Where does this go? Right? People spill out their most intimate secrets to their therapists. And the federal government now is saying, therapist notes are not sacrosanct. We can have access to those things. This is, mind-boggling to the extreme. I don't know how to say it beyond that. It's mind-boggling to the extreme. So let's pick up your phone calls. Ann in Santa Barbara, listening on KPFK. Hey, Ann, what's up?
Yes. Well, we shouldn't be surprised at the depths of William Barr's corruption, since we know he's a toady for the most corrupt and heartless president in history, and our only hope to get rid of the whole lot of them is to run an anti-corruption Democrat against Trump and get a huge turnout. And I think it's really obvious the only person who can do this is Bernie Sanders. He is absolutely uncorruptible, and he is number one in spite of the corporate media blackout. He has support from the entire country. And if his actual policies and proposals were given coverage, I think he'd do even better. And
yeah,
so,
at my book event here in Berkeley last night, I had about 120 to 150 people. Bernie was just down the road, and last night, which we did not plan, and he had 10,000 people. He had 11,000 people day before yesterday in Denver. He's drawing huge crowds, and they're not being reported on. Donald Trump does a rally with 1,200 people show up, and it's all over the news, and it's carried live on Fox. Bernie speaks to 10,000 people, and you don't even friggin' hear about it. But yeah, I agree with you. Bernie Sanders, the other, I believe, incorruptible candidate is Elizabeth Warren, but it looks like her odds are sinking. Although we'll see. She's getting a resurgence here. But and ultimately, when it gets to the convention, we probably will see some sort of an alliance between the two. Ann, your point is very, very well made, and I completely agree with it. Thank you very much for the call. Bill in Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Yes, I'd like to expand on that Greg Palast story with Stacey Abrams. I called the Staten Island Advance at the city desk, and they're going to do a story on the voter suppression and purging that's been going on down in Georgia, and she hadn't heard about it. Here's a New York City newspaper hadn't heard about the decision for Greg Palast and Stacey Abrams. And I like to follow that with Stacey Abrams.
It was in the New York Times.
Oh, was it? Well, she didn't hear about it.
Yeah.
I called her about a week ago.
Yeah, it was, it was a relatively obscure story, but it was in the New York Times. You can go to the New York Times website and find it.
Well, it was obscure enough for the Staten Island paper not to have picked it up. Anyway, yes, so she's going to do a story on it as well, because this is terribly important, I believe, Tom. And I would like to make a suggestion that, the people that go to the city council meetings and town hall meetings, stay afterwards and have some discussions on, getting things organized a little better and overseeing these different voting stations. I become extremely frustrated down here in Florida, Tom. As a New Yorker, I'm appalled at the ignorance and the lack of enthusiasm with a lot of the people. There's a hell of a lot of apathy, and it's got to stop. All right, that's all I got. Thanks, Tom.
Well, it was a great one, Bill. And the way that we do that is you reach out to your friends, whether it's social media or email or seeing them at the bar or at the club or at the restaurant or at the golf course or wherever you hang out with people, and telling them what's going on. Inform people and tell them where to find progressive media.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You've got, people like me and Stephanie Miller and Sonali and Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman and all kinds of great programs out there talking about these issues. And welcome back. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Hello, Tom. That's a lot of depressing stuff you brought up about what's currently going on in our government.
Well, depression is what people experience when they feel that things aren't right and they can't do anything about it. If you get involved, if you participate, you are doing something about it, and that tends to not make it depressing. It just makes it angering. So try to recalibrate, Jared.
I agree, and we should be focusing more on, honestly, just taking our revenge. As far as I'm concerned, I want Bernie Sanders to win, and I do want him to appoint an attorney general, and I do want him to go after these people who have basically stabbed the American people in the back over these last 200 years plus. With these war criminals who are not been arrested. You have these bankers who, as far as I'm concerned, they should get the death penalty, arrested and get the death penalty for what they've done. They've caused thousands and thousands of suicides.
I'm not a fan of the death penalty, Jared, but yeah, let's throw them in jail
for these people.
For a good long time.
For these people, I would make an exception. For these people, I would make an exception.
I won't.
But, you have these war criminals and Bill Barr, and, I find the whole concept of a pardon, I don't think that should exclude you from being arrested for crimes. If you're somebody who's doing that to pardon yourself or other criminals, that's a conspiracy. And as far as I'm concerned, that should make you null and void to any immunity to prosecution.
Yeah. Well, I'm of the opinion that Bill Barr has been engaging in criminal conspiracies, at least politically criminal and probably legally criminal conspiracies, since the 90s. After he left office, he went to work for a law firm that mostly serves the interests of the rich and powerful and the corporate, and God only knows what he was doing there. And now he's back in government, basically doing for Trump the same thing he did for George Bush. The difference is that George Bush was corrupt in a few areas that had to do with winning elections and maintaining political control. Donald Trump is corrupt in a broad spectrum of areas that include money laundering from Russian oligarchs through Deutsche Bank to keep him afloat. You know, there's this new book out, Dark Tower, about this. I'm going to be talking about that in the next hour. There's a, I was going to say subtle difference, but really what's happening now is, Barr could cover up George Bush because George Bush, the elder, seemed like, to everybody like a reasonably thoughtful, intelligent, well-educated, well-spoken patriarch of a dynastic family. His father was Prescott Bush, the senator from Connecticut, who got busted by FDR for giving money to the Nazis, but nonetheless, he had a pedigree. Donald Trump is a New York City real estate hustler who has a terrible reputation, has been through 3 wives, has been accused credibly of at least 20 instances of sexual assault, has had all these companies fail, has been involved in numerous fraudulent businesses, and hangs out with mobsters. And so now Bill Barr is trying to do the same thing for him, and it's frankly a little harder. So we'll see how he pulls it off. Jared, thanks for the call. It's nice to hear from you. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. We have a special video up over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was 1 fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. Welcome back. We're talking about corruption, Bill Barr, what's it going to take? How do we spread the word? How do we wake people up? What impact is it going to have on the next election? All these kinds of things. And, it's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. So let's see. I see no stars. Let me find Lisa in Miami, Florida. Hey, Lisa, what's on your mind?
Hi, just one sec. I'll take you off speaker. Listen, I'm going to try to be calm, but I have a thought. The only thing I can think of to possibly fight what's going on, which is, what isn't going on. I looked this up. There are over 600 billionaires in the United States, supposedly. We need to get billionaires, hopefully there are some, to try to put money forth to secure our election system, since Mitch McConnell doesn't want to do that. Is that a crazy idea or not?
No, it's a brilliant idea. The problem is that this has to be done legislatively. It has to be done at law. The Help America Vote Act set a new set of rules. H.R. 1 revises those rules and changes them so that they're more small d democratic rather than rigged for the Republican states. But supporting a massive effort to inform voters, get these things changed all across the country is a great idea, Lisa. And I think that Tom Steyer and frankly Mike Bloomberg have better places where they could be putting their money. You know, I suggested a year ago when iHeartRadio, the station I'm on here on AM 910 in San Francisco, the entire company was up for sale about a year ago. And it was just a little over $1 billion. And they've got hundreds of stations all across the country. And I wrote an open letter to Tom Steyer saying, hey, you know, this company's for sale. You should buy it. And put progressive shows on, you know, all over the country. I mean, it would literally change the nature of politics in America. And I don't know if he ever read it. If he did, I don't know if he has enough money to do it. Bloomberg certainly does, and he's got this Bloomberg empire. He should go full Rupert Murdoch. I mean, I'm with you on that. Thanks a lot for the call, Linda. Perry in Fort Lauderdale. Hey, Perry, what's on your mind?
Hi. I got news for her. I live in Florida. It ain't happening here. Not with this legislature. But I'm calling today as a Jew, and I'm very concerned. Now, this election really doesn't affect me or the 89-year-old mother I live with and take care of. We're on Social Security. Nothing happened to that. But I'm going to tell you something. The first two candidates that are in line, that have won two, have no chance of winning, okay? There is no chance, and I'm saying this sincerely. Even my mother knows that there is no chance that a Jewish person is going to win the presidency.
You're talking Bernie and Bloomberg, who are both Jewish.
But I know, either one of them, neither of them has a shot. I don't care how much money you have.
I think that, Perry, you know, keep in mind, there's no way the right-wing fundamentalist Christian, they call themselves Christians, I call them frauds, but there's no way that these right-wing so-called fundamentalist Christians are going to be voting for a Democrat anyway, whether that Democrat is Jewish or African American.
No, I'm not saying that, but you are going to.
They didn't vote for Barack Obama.
No, I understand that. But you will not be able to make up the amount of. They will come out in force. I mean, they will come out in force because now they'll think of Trump as their lesser of two evils. I'm just being honest with you. I don't want to.
Well, Perry, let me
really win this is Biden.
No, Biden. Frankly, in my opinion, Biden would lose to Trump because he's such a lousy debater. He's a stutterer, and his constant interrupting himself and pausing and things like that, which I believe derive from his stuttering, make it seem like he's got mild dementia or something. I mean, it's just, if you go back and look at the debates, particularly the first two debates, they were train wrecks for Joe Biden. And, this is why he never even placed third in the two previous presidential primaries that he ran in, and maybe three. He's run for president multiple times. He's a wonderful guy. I have met Joe Biden. He's a great retail politician. I mean, he came up and put his arms around me and shook my hand and hugged Louise, and we had a nice talk, and it's like he's just a wonderful man. I love Joe Biden. But, I'm not a fan of all of his policies. But the unfortunate reality is you put him in a microphone in front of 1,000 people and he does not communicate well unless he's reading off a prompter. And he's got to be able to do one-on-one with these guys. But I do think that it is, here's my prediction. And in this context, to some extent, I am agreeing with you, Perry. Viktor Orban in Hungary has taken George Soros, who was born in Hungary and is now an American citizen, but has funded some of the good government initiatives in his home country and in Hungary. And he's got literally billboards around the country about George Soros, the international Jew who's trying to harm Hungary. I believe, and I hope I'm wrong, I really hope I'm wrong, but I believe that if Bloomberg, now this would not apply to Sanders because he's not a rich man, but if Bloomberg becomes the nominee, you're going to see the Trump, not necessarily the Trump campaign, but the hard right surrogates of the Trump campaign turning Bloomberg into the international Jew, the rich Jewish guy who's manipulating people. And, we haven't seen that yet, but I am fully expecting it. And, can we push back? Sure.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Mind Blank, Cambridge Analytica, and the Plot to Break America by Christopher Wiley. My life now looks, this is from the Revelations chapter, next to the last chapter. My life now looks like that of a paranoid man, but after being assaulted in the street, receiving threats from rogue private security firms, having my hotel room broken into late at night as I was sleeping, and experiencing 2 hacking attempts on my email in the past 12 months, it's only sensible to be cautious. When I had my flat checked for security risks, the TV was deemed a risk, as it could be used to watch or listen to me without my ever knowing. As we dismantled it, I smiled at the irony of a TV that watches you. In the days leading up to the story's publication, when Facebook began sending me legal threats and escalated my case up to its deputy general counsel and vice president, my lawyers realized that the company saw my whistleblowing as a major threat to its business. Having experience on other hacking cases, my lawyers knew what companies backed into a corner were willing to do. But Facebook was different. They did not need to hack me. They could simply track me everywhere because of the apps on my phone, where I was, who my contacts were, who I was meeting. I disposed of my phone, and my lawyers bought new clean phones that have never touched Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. The terms and conditions of Facebook's mobile app ask for microphone and camera access. Although the company is at pains to deny pulling user audio data for targeted advertising, there is nonetheless a technical permission sitting on our phones that allows access to audio capabilities. And I was not an average user. I was the company's biggest reputational threat at the time. At least in theory, audio could be activated, and my lawyers were concerned that the company could listen in on my conversations with them or with the police. Facebook already had access to my photos and my camera, which put them in a position to not just listen to me, but also to see where I was. Even if I was alone in the bathroom taking a shower, I wasn't ever really alone. If my phone was there, so was Facebook. There was no escape. But getting rid of my phone wasn't going to be enough. My mom, dad, and sisters all had to remove Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp from their phones for the same reason. But Facebook also knew who all my friends were. They knew where they liked to go out, what we wrote about in messages, and they knew where we all lived. Even hanging out with my friends became a risk, as Facebook had access to their phones. If a friend took a photo, Facebook could access it. And in facial recognition algorithms could, at least in theory, detect my face in the photos sitting on other people's phones, even if they were strangers to me. As I was getting rid of my old electronics, my friends joked that it was as if I was exorcising the demons inside the machines. And one friend even brought over some sage to burn, just in case. A funny gesture, of course, but in a way it really was an exorcism. We now live in a world where there are invisible spirits made of code and data that have the power to watch us, listen to us, and think about us. And I wanted these specters gone from my life. On March 16, 2018, a day before The Guardian and the New York Times published my story, Facebook announced that it was banning me, not only from Facebook, but also Instagram. Facebook had refused to ban white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and other armies of hate, but it had chosen to ban me. The company demanded that I hand over my phone and personal computer and said that the only way for me to be reinstated was, in effect, to give them the same information I was providing the authorities. Facebook behaved as if it were a nation state rather than a company. The firm did not seem to understand that I was not the subject of investigation. They were. My lawyers advised me to refuse their demands so as not to interfere with a lawful police and regulatory investigation. Later, when I was working with the authorities, the ban made it far more difficult to hand over evidence that was sitting on my Facebook account, and the investigation into what happened during the Brexit referendum suffered as a result. They say you appreciate something only when it's gone, and it was only when I was erased from Facebook that I truly realized how frequently my life touched their platform. Several of my phone's apps stopped working, a dating app, a taxi app, a messaging app, because they used Facebook authentication. Subscriptions and accounts I had on websites failed for the same reason. People often talk about a dualism, the cyber world and our real lives. But after having most of my digital identity confiscated, I can tell you that they are not separate. When you are erased from social media, you lose touch with people. I stopped getting invited to parties, not intentionally, but because those invites also happened on Facebook or were posted on Instagram. Friends who did not have my new phone number found it nearly impossible to get a hold of me, except for trying to send an email to my lawyers. When I got through the thick of the whistleblowing, It would only be in coincidental encounters at clubs or bars that I would make contact with people I had not seen in months. And now when guys on dating apps ask to check out my Instagram profile, it starts an awkward explanation of how I was banned and that I'm not catfishing, I promise. It's as if my identity has been confiscated and people no longer believe I am who I say I am. Sometimes I get recognized as that guy, and people worry that someone might start watching them if they decide to meet me. I always tell them that they needn't worry because these companies are already tracking them 24/7. This ban was nothing more than a dick move by Facebook, and it felt like trolling by frightened bullies. For me, it created at most an annoying personal hassle and was not nearly as consequential to my life as the kinds of retaliation that other whistleblowers have experienced, not to mention the degree of damage to modern society that the platform has already aided and abetted. But it showed me just how integral my online identity had become to so many facets of my life. The book by Christopher Wiley. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's you know, as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. I'm broadcasting live from our iHeartRadio affiliate in San Francisco at Real Talk 910, AM 910. And if you're one of the listeners here in San Francisco and you listen to Real Talk 910, I recommend you do the same thing if you're listening to any of our commercial affiliates. Call up the advertisers. You'll hear them during our show, and the local advertisers, and tell them you're listening. And say, you know, hey, I heard your car dealership advertising on Real Talk 910. I'm not looking for a car right now, but I'm going to tell all my friends who might be that they should patronize you, and thanks for supporting the radio station. If you're listening to non-commercial radio, if you're listening to us on one of our many Pacifica affiliates, you know, tell your friends about them and donate money to them when they do their pledge drives. And obviously, if you're watching on Free Speech TV, you know, pitch in during the Free Speech TV fund drives. I think there's one coming up in a few weeks. We're gonna do that again. So, well, I'm here because I've got a new book out, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. I told the publisher the title should be The Republican War on Voting. The Democrats are not running a war on voting. This is exclusively an effort by the Republican Party and Republican Secretaries of State. But there it is. And last night we had a great turnout, packed the house, had to get extra chairs and whatnot. It was essentially standing room only in Berkeley. And you know, on we roll, right? Tomorrow night is Town Hall Seattle. Pramila Jayapal is going to be joining me. I'll be doing my little riff about about voter suppression and how the vote is being stolen today, and how historically the other ways that it has been stolen back to the founding of the Republic. And Pramila Jayapal, the congresswoman from Washington State, who's also the co-chair, along with Mark Pocan, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, we're going to be sharing the stage and talking about what's up. And that's tomorrow night at Town Hall. And you can get tickets. There's a link at thomhartmann.com for where the tickets are. And this is a station benefit for KBCS, our affiliate, our Pacifica affiliate in Seattle. On Sunday, February 23rd, the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. one of our commercial affiliates, again, support their advertisers, please, and tell your friends about them so that we can all grow our audience here and build progressive media. You can order your tickets there, through their website or through mine. And then February 28th, I'll be at Powell's in Portland, and March 1st, I'll be at Frugal Muse Books in Chicago. So if you're in Chicago, show up. That's going to be in the afternoon. That's going to be on March 1st at noon. All the rest of these things are in the evening. So that's what's going on. Now, in this second hour of the program, I want to get into the economy. And there's some pretty startling economic indicators out there. I'm guessing if the bottom falls out before Trump leaves office, he's going to blame it on the Chinese virus, and which will play a role in this, and is already playing a role in this. Apple announced yesterday or the day before that they're expecting next quarter that their revenues will be down because their production is down. I mean, at Foxconn, the factory where they make the Apple devices, only the first day of work, and I haven't seen numbers since then, but the first day of work, only 10% of the workforce showed up. People are not leaving their houses in large chunks, large parts of China. First it was the doctor who discovered the virus who died, and then it was yesterday or today it was reported this morning, I read it in the Financial Times, that the doctor who is the head for the state of Hubei, I think it is, the state in which Wuhan is located, the guy who was the administrator died from this. He had been supervising, caring for people. And so this has got China pretty freaked out, and increasingly the world freaked out. So, it's going to slow things down. It doesn't mean that throws things into a crash or anything like that. But there are other numbers. This from Axios, U.S. industrial, this is U.S. U.S. industrial production fell 0.3% in January month over month, and the previous month was revised down by a -0.4%. And this is the fifth reading in a row below zero. The annualized rate of industrial production in the United States, annualized, year by year, the annualized rate is now -0.8%. And, that's something that is a very, very, very good presager. John Hill, who's a capital market strategist with BMO, a company that, analyzes this stuff and advises clients on how and where to invest. He said, the drop in factory output is particularly concerning as over the last 50 years, we've only seen one instance where industrial production slowed this much year to year without a commensurate recession. And now part of this is Boeing, the Boeing MAX. The predictions are that just shutting down the Boeing MAX is going to hit the United States GDP could hit it by as much as 1%. Because it's not just Boeing. I mean, there's literally thousands of companies around the United States that make parts for Boeing. But the Fed report showed that industrial output was lower by 7% in the aerospace sector and 0.1% overall in manufacturing. Again, the manufacturing in the United States for the entire year is now in recession. It's negative. Even utilities, production of electricity and gas, natural gas, things that we use to heat our homes and power our lights, that was down 4%. And which is probably accounted for by and large by factories not running at full capacity or not running at all. So you've got that. And meanwhile, hang on just a second, let me get back to my page here. The Baltic Dry Index, this is something probably you've never heard of. If you're in the shipping business, you know what the BDI is, the Baltic Dry Index. And what it is it's a measurement of the activity by ships at sea that carry things like ore, iron ore or coal or oil. I believe that there's a subset of it that is ships carrying manufactured goods, but I'm not certain. But the Baltic Dry Index is one of the most important factors, variables, that economists look at when they're trying to figure out whether the world's economy is expanding or contracting. And this is from Chuck's riff in the Aiden Forecast daily newsletter. He says, this past week I was taken aback by the drop in the Baltic Dry Index. The BDI dropped 72% since early December, which was prior to the virus being announced. But given the fact that China's economy has basically been shut down for over a month now, the shipment of goods from China is non-existent, and this is quite evident in the BDI. Oh, and by the way, the BDI is now at levels that it hasn't seen since 1986. Now, those of you old enough to remember, what followed 1986? The stock market crash in 1987 that was the largest since 1929. Now, we recovered from that quickly, but still, 1986. He said industrial production here and in Europe have gone negative. Now, I just gave you all the numbers for the United States. Industrial production in Europe has also gone negative. And again, this was before the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus. Factory orders have gone negative. The bond guys get this. This is one of the reasons why massive amounts of money in the stock market have shifted out of the stock market, and this is institutional investors, the big banks, big investment houses, the people who know what's going on. Millions and millions of dollars have shifted out of the stock market and into the bond market. Why? Because bonds are traditionally considered safe havens. So people are getting ready, right? They're building their steel umbrellas for when the rain starts.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll give you a few more details on this. There's one that's particularly startling. But I have a question around this, too. I'll start with that right after this. And welcome back. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. Hey, Marta, what's up?
Well, great news. It looks like Bernie is going to beat Trump in Texas and turn Texas blue. Now, meanwhile...
What makes you think that, Marta?
He's getting... his poll numbers are getting closer and closer to Trump's in Texas. So they're increasing. So we have to look at the momentum, look at the trend line. And he's getting closer and closer, and he is the only one. So meanwhile, 2 days ago on Face the Nation, a panel of white talking heads played the tape of Bloomberg on, stop and frisk, and said that like Trump, who is politically incorrect, and that's how Trump won, it's advantageous for the Democrats to run Bloomberg because he's politically incorrect. Now, I heard a young man talk about how terrifying it was to be walking down the street and a cop car pulls over. They're yelling at him, get down on the sidewalk, get down on the sidewalk. We're, with guns close to him, close to his head. And spread your legs, spread your arms, and a gun right at his head. So it's not stop and frisk, it's stop and terrify and assault. And, the damage that's been done to thousands and thousands of these young people only because they had a little bit of marijuana and a minuscule number had guns. So I think Bernie is the most moral, and we have to stop thinking about who's the most advantageous. We have to go, in my opinion, with the one who has the most moral, conscientious, positive policies and background and character. And, you're talking about the economy. We have to invest in the future. Free college, Medicare for all, working with organic farmers, small farmers, all of Bernie's programs are solutions. We have to invest in, that's the only thing that's going to prevent a massive recession or even depression.
Well, preventing a massive recession or depression is, to some extent, out of the hands of the politicians. I mean, Donald Trump has been holding this at bay successfully for some time, but through using the Fed basically, and but it's going to be a real challenge. Marta, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Nina in McAlpin, Florida. Hey, Nina, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I am great, but I'll get better. How about you?
You changed my subject while I was on hold. I'm sorry, but the census deal, my daughter did that online like 2 months ago. We got it in the mail and sent it right back through online, and everything was great. So I'm hoping that...
Was it census.gov?
The real deal.
Are you sure it was the actual census?
Well, it came from the Bureau of Census, and when she went online, it was right there to fill out your household thing, so...
Good. I didn't know that they were doing that at this point online, but that's good. I'm glad you did that, Nina, and just be careful, because the Republican Party is sending out scam things, and then there are scammers who are just trying to get your information, too. But good on you. Nina, thank you for the call. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So, I was talking about all these signs of looming recession, and the ones that I gave you are just kind of the tip of the iceberg. We talked with Richard Wolff last week about the massive explosion in consumer debt. People are not keeping up. The massive explosion in student debt, particularly since 2005 when Congress passed the bankruptcy laws, so you can't discharge it. And then the banks thought, oh, these are absolutely risk-free loans. Let's jump into this with both feet. We have, housing debt is going up too because the housing bubble is the consequence of low interest rates. So we're seeing this explosion in the value of houses, or at least in the price of houses. But all of this begs the question. Recessions do have political consequences. They have major political consequences. It's virtually a truism. It's almost always true that when the economy is bad, the electorate will elect the other party. Jimmy Carter had a recession. It was the tail end of the second Arab oil boycott. Ronald Reagan became president. Well, obviously, there was a bunch of other factors, but there was a recession there. The biggest one in our lifetimes in recent days was 2008. George W. Bush, and Dick Cheney presided over the largest crash and freeze up of our economic system, literally the largest since the Great Depression. And Barack Obama got elected president. So when the economy is bad, typically people say, we'll try the other party. Maybe they can do a better job. Because people do vote their pocketbooks. They do vote their jobs. People want to keep their jobs. They want to be able to keep their home. They're making bets on the future. When you put money on a credit card that you can't pay off this month, but you think maybe you can pay off in 6 months, that's a bet on the future that 6 months down the road is going to be good. And with the average credit card debt in the United States around $17,000 per person, that a lot of people are making bets on the future. And if they're afraid that those bets are going to go south, or if it looks to them like those bets are going to go south, it becomes very problematic in terms of saying, well, yes, let's maintain the status quo when the status quo isn't doing good. So this recession is coming. There is now no doubt about it. It's also, to the extent that it is coming, if it happens between now and November, Donald Trump will almost certainly blame it on the virus in China. But that's not the single and sole cause. That's one small piece of it. But it's coming. And it's coming in large part because the Republicans refuse to allow Barack Obama to really and truly address the core of the problem. You know, his Recovery Act, which yesterday, I believe it was, he tweeted out, you know, on this day 10 years ago, I signed the Recovery Act, which has led to 10 years of economic expansion, which is true. And he kind of blew away Donald Trump because he basically took credit for his own economic expansion. God bless him. And he's right. And it was a good thing. But the whole point is that if this crash happens or recession happens before the election, it increases the probability that people will vote for a Democrat instead of Donald Trump. If he can hold the economy together here in the United States, even if the worldwide economy starts falling apart, if he can hold it together in the United States, it increases the probability that Donald Trump gets reelected. And then what happens is, I mean, Trump has the ability, since Jerome Powell, the Fed chief, just dances to Trump's tunes no matter what he says. If Powell, you know, and Powell's been wanting to raise interest rates. The interest rates are artificially low, and they have been for a number of years. Well, they have been since 2008, 2009. And it's the main thing that's kind of held the economy together. And if Trump, after the election, let's say Trump loses the election, and he says to Jerome Powell, you know, on November 5th or November 10th, he says to Jerome Powell, go ahead and raise interest rates. I don't care. I'm leaving office. And Powell, you know, kicks him up even a little bit, even, you know, a couple hundred basis points, you know, 1/10, 2/10, 0.5%. That will throw the economy into recession. There's no doubt about it, because so many parts of the economy now, the financialization of our economy, it's so heavily financialized. So much of our economy now depends on you know, big corporations and all this, and on banking rather than making things. It will throw the country into recession, which means that President Sanders or President Bloomberg or President Klobuchar or whoever it is going to be coming into office with a recession. And of course, you know what the Republicans are going to say. Aha! The market fell apart because they elected Bernie Sanders. The market fell apart because they elected Joe Biden. The market fell apart. You know, fill in the blank, right? This is what they are going to say. In fact, before the 2016 election, a week before the 2016 election, Donald Trump tweeted, if I'm not elected, the economy will go into a recession under Hillary Clinton. Right? This is how this guy thinks. So my question to you is, how do we plan for this? How do we message through this? How do we inform people? Because it's really hard. I mean, you can't just walk up to the average person and say, you know, the Baltic Dry Index, or, you know, industrial production in the United States has been negative now for almost a full year. It's been that way in Europe for a year. That's a leading indicator, about a 1 to 2 year leading indicator of a recession coming. The yield curve inverted for the second time 2 weeks ago. And the yield curve always predicts a recession about a year in advance, sometimes as little as 3 months in advance, but typically it's about a year. You can't just walk up to people and say that. Now, when Reagan kind of juiced the economy, when Reagan supercharged the economy in the early 1980s by, you know, cutting taxes and cutting regulation and letting corporations start buy back their stocks, you know, the economy started looking really good. It was a sugar high, just like we have right now. And people would say to me, you know, well, what, Reagan seems to be doing a great job. And I would say, yeah, you give me $1 trillion credit card, I'll show you what it looks like to live large. I think that may be our best chance.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Pointing out that the so-called Reagan, or the so-called Trump, you know, good economy, which, by the way, is not as good as Obama's, was just juiced. It was a sugar high. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States, the Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, Al Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi Kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hurst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these 3 countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to two sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the possibility that a recession prior to the election will hurt Trump or may actually help Trump if he can play victim and say, oh, it's all the virus, et cetera, versus a recession after the election that Trump could use to blame on a Democrat being elected if he loses the election, which is fairly likely, frankly, if you look at the polls right now. Now, Trump does have this billion-dollar Death Star that he has built, and there's a brilliant article about it over on The Atlantic, and if you haven't read it, you need to go track it down. But, they're doing what Cambridge Analytica did, and only they're doing it with greater sophistication and a lot more resources, and they've got their billionaires lined up behind it. And it's already happening. I mean, he's got thousands. He's spending $1 million a day on Facebook to push out ads that contain just naked lies. And that's just fine with Mark Zuckerberg. Facebook doesn't care if politicians lie. Although when Mike Bloomberg started doing memes on Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, all of a sudden it was like, oh, Mike Bloomberg, a Democrat is doing this? Oh my God. And he wasn't lying, by the way. He was just basically paying a fee to influencers, which is something corporations do literally every day. It's part of the business model over there at Instagram. But Zuckerberg doesn't make money on it. The influencers make the money on it. So anyhow, Bloomberg starts doing that on Instagram, and suddenly Zuckerberg and Facebook are like, whoa, man, we need to reconsider the rules here. This is starting to look pretty grody to me. So anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls and see where we're going with all this. Beth in Rockford, Illinois. Hey, Beth, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
Yeah. I'm calling concerning about Bernie Sanders. I'm a Bernie supporter. I voted for him last time, and then, of course, he didn't make it. I voted for Hillary. My concern is I know people that were Bernie supporters that have gone crazy and gone to Trump, and they are pushing people to vote for Bernie. I have a daughter in Iowa where she was shocked to see that a lot of the people that were voting in the caucuses were Republicans voting for Bernie, and I'm wondering why they're all pushing for Bernie. And then I asked one, I said, why? Are you going to vote for Bernie this time? And the answer laughed and said, oh no, we're all voting for Trump, but we're all pushing for Bernie.
Yeah.
And so, and they're talking about, when he has his town halls and that his supporters are getting more violent in that. I'm wondering if they're really Bernie supporters.
You've got two kinds of people who are Trump voters who are showing up at Bernie rallies and who are becoming Bernie activists on Twitter and Facebook and social media and things like that. You've got the Trump voters who voted for Donald Trump because they actually believed him when he said, I'm the outsider, I'm going to blow up the system, I'm going to do away with this corrupt quid pro quo thing where the lobbyists always get what they want, the average person always gets screwed. I'm going to change all that. I'm going to be the guy who does, I'm going to raise taxes on rich people. Donald Trump said this. I'm going to raise taxes. He said he was going to raise taxes on rich people. He said he was going to roll out a healthcare system that was even better than Obamacare. It would cover everybody at a lower price. Sounded suspiciously like single-payer healthcare. He said, he promised that. He said, we're going to bring back the factories. Actually, we haven't brought back any factories, or the ones that we have brought back are more than balanced out by the ones that have continued to leave. As I said, industrial production is actually in a recession right now. So basically, he lied about all those things. But there are a lot of people who are just sick and tired of the same old politics, whether it was under a Democratic or a Republican administration. Basically, since 1980, we have no longer been operating under Keynesian economics, under FDR, LBJ economics. We've been operating under Herbert Hoover economics. And so people are like, damn, I want to change. And so there's a lot of people who voted for Bernie in the primary and then voted for Trump in the general. I knew a bunch of those people when I lived in D.C. I've told the story a million times and I won't repeat it. That said, there are probably also people who are Trump supporters who are looking at the field of candidates and saying, well, who can Trump most easily beat? And because the drumbeat on CNN and MSNBC for the last few months, particularly as Bernie has been rising in the polls substantially, the drumbeat from the corporate consultant class or the Democratic consultant class, these guys who are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to consult for Democratic campaigns, and then they also get paid when they show up on TV if they're regulars on the networks. Their drumbeat is, because Bernie doesn't hire consultants, right? Their drumbeat is, well, you've got to go with one of the so-called centrist candidates. If you don't, you're going to lose. And so a lot of these Trump supporters who want to see Trump reelected are saying, well, if Bernie's the nominee, then he'll easily beat Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is that with the exception of the 1992 election, when George Herbert Walker Bush lost, every election since 1980 run by the Republicans has been a base election. They have simply called out to their base. Ronald Reagan unambiguously, in his first speech was in Philadelphia, Mississippi, unambiguously called out to the racists. He said he was going to try and deconstruct Social Security, reform it in quotes, everybody knew what that meant. He said he was going to try and kill off Medicare and Medicaid. He said he was going to have free trade all around the world and let American factories go elsewhere. And he actually wrote NAFTA, the first version of it. That was written during the Reagan administration. And he said he was going to outlaw abortion, and he said he was going to roll back the 1954 Brown v. Board decision. These were the things that Ronald Reagan ran on. And he was going to increase defense spending radically. And those were the things that his base loved. And so his base turned out and he became president. George Herbert Walker Bush tried to go down the middle. He was like, oh, well, I think, I'm a more moderate guy, and that was his pitch in the primary, in the 1980 primary, which he lost to Reagan. But he's like, I'm down the middle. And Bill Clinton came out with his New Covenant speech, which was his stump speech in 1992. He gave it all over the country. And you can read it. It's reprinted in my book, Threshold, but it's also on the internet. You can find it easily. And you read the New Covenant speech, and it's pure FDR. It's, we're going to build schools, we're going to build hospitals, we're going to reconstruct our infrastructure, we're going to raise taxes on rich people, we're going to expand the poverty programs that Lyndon Johnson created with the Great Society. We're going to expand unemployment and union rights that Franklin Roosevelt brought us. That was Bill Clinton's sales pitch. In other words, Bill Clinton ran a base campaign in '92, and it got him elected. Now, he didn't govern that way, and some would say he didn't govern that way because Alan Greenspan and Jamie Dimon, the week before he was put into office, told him, you can't do that. We will pull our financial support of you. There are other people who say he wasn't able to do that because Newt Gingrich and the Republicans took control of the House. But that wasn't until, I believe, '86. That was in his second term, as I recall, or maybe it was '84, the end of his first term. But he didn't govern that way, sadly, tragically. So then, Obama again ran as the guy who was going to blow things up. His slogan was hope and change, and people went for it. George W. Bush tried to run as a somewhat more conventional, moderate Republican. He didn't run he ran a base campaign to some extent, but kind of down the middle. And he frankly, if you look at the popular vote, he lost by 500,000 votes. According to the exit polls, he lost by 2 million votes. And according to the exit polls in Florida, he lost there by 90,000 votes. So the problem is the last time Democrats ran a real base election outside of the kind of phony one that Bill Clinton did in '92 was George McGovern in '72. And George McGovern got wiped out. But it had nothing to do with running a base election. I mean, that was his anti-war election. It had to do with the fact that George McGovern was a soft-spoken guy who couldn't talk well didn't give good speeches. He had Tom Eagleton as his vice president for a while, and then it was revealed that Tom Eagleton had electroshock therapy, and I think this was around the time One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest came out. And it was like, and then he had to change and get another vice president, and it was just a total cluster. And so you get these people sitting around going, if you get Bernie, it's going to be just like George McGovern. No, it's not. It's a completely different thing. I ranted about this yesterday. And so the bottom line is that the Republicans, by and large, since 1980, have run base campaigns where they don't try to reach out to moderates, and they certainly don't try to convince Democrats. Instead, they try to get their base out. When you consider that Donald Trump was elected with 26% of the eligible electorate, what that tells you is that if you can simply get your base energized, you can easily win elections. And we saw this in many states in 2018 where Democrats flipped congressional seats and state house and state senate seats around the country from red to blue by running base campaigns. And that's what Bernie is doing. He's running, and that's what Elizabeth Warren is doing. They're running base campaigns. And that's why I think that these so-called middle-of-the-road campaigns are not, they're going to, when you look at the middle of the road candidates, Al Gore lost, John Kerry lost, Hillary Clinton lost. These were the middle of the road kind of, we're not going to make big changes. It's just all small incremental stuff. So I think that these Trump guys who are out there trying to promote Bernie are going to get burned as badly as the Democrats in 1980. And I remember the movement, who were trying to get Reagan to be the nominee on the Republican side because they thought he'd be easy to beat. And, they thought George Bush would be much harder to beat. And, look at how that turned out. So, Beth, it's all real, but we'll see how it plays out.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Tom in Alexandria, Minnesota. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm concerned about the timidity of the Democrats. It seems to me that two recent events, the budget that they put out and the cowardly behavior of the Senate, where 53 people, Republicans, didn't live up to their oath. I think in a previous election, James Carville coined the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." I think the Democrats should say, "It's the congressional Republicans, stupid." And, Mitch McConnell, if we don't win the Senate and we win the presidency, Mitch McConnell still has all the power. They got to pivot. They got to get more hardcore.
Yeah. I'm with you, and we need to be focusing on Senate races, and that that's the news. The good news is that in the last election in 2018, that Senate election, about 2/3 of the people running for re-election were Democrats. In the 2016 election, or in the 2020 election, about 2/3 of the people running for re-election in the Senate are Republicans. And there's a bunch of vulnerable ones: Martha McSally in Arizona, Tom Tillis in North Carolina. You've got a number, Cory Gardner in Colorado. Go ahead.
It's not only the Senate. The behavior of people like Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, they should be fodder for the Democrats. I mean, I think it's the Republican stupid is a pretty good phrase.
Yeah, and I think I would expand that to say it's the corruption stupid. Jim Jordan now has a sex scandal swirling around him. I'm guessing that it'll take him down. If he had been a Democrat, it would have taken him down instantly. But the same thing happened to Denny Hastert, who climbed all the way up to Speaker of the House, and he was a wrestling coach too. And it turned out that he was up to no good with some of the boys on the team. And now it looks like Jim Jordan knew what was going on and covered it up, or at least ignored it. But with Matt Gaetz and some of these other guys, who are very effective, high energy politicians, I don't think that you can go after them. I think there's a grudging admiration on the part of Democrats when they see Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and these guys just, Doug Collins, just go nuts on these issues. I think that a lot of Democrats are not saying that's terrible. They're saying, I wish Democrats were like that. Remember when Alan Grayson was in Congress and he got up on the floor of the House and he said, here's the Republican health care plan. Don't die, don't get sick, number one. Number two, if you get sick, die quickly. And the Republicans were outraged. How can they say that? How can they do that? But that's what it was, and that's how it worked. And he was a very effective politician. So I'm less sanguine about this, Tom. I'm more. I don't think that running against specific Republicans like that will be as effective as running against the naked corruption they're participating in. They're voting for legislation that increases pollution, that dirties our water, that fouls our air, that diminishes the future for our children, that deregulates the banks and increases the probability of crashes, that makes your employer more able to harm you. Those are the things they need to focus on. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So Donald Trump is getting ready. He's getting ready to commute the sentence of Paul Manafort, and he's getting ready to maybe even pardon him, and probably commute the sentence of Roger Stone. And how does he get ready for that? He commutes the sentence of a Democrat. Real simple. And that way he can say, oh, it's not partisan. I'm not just trying to help Republicans. He just let Rod Blagojevich out of jail. It's amazing. I'm telling you, this is a prediction. This is what's coming. Tom in Jerusalem, Israel. Hey, Tom, are you the fellow who called from Israel earlier in the week, or are you another person who's watching?
Yeah, if it's okay. I called from the Twilight Zone. You're my therapist.
Okay, yeah. We try to limit people to once a week, but it's fine.
I do apologize. Okay, I do apologize. I will remember that rule. Anyway, the Cambridge Analytica thing, thank you very much for that. I actually got an encounter with Facebook when I posted something about Trump, with the southern border of Colorado thing, and I just tweeted, and I apologize, I should have just left us at tweeting this, but I got a nasty from Facebook, and they said that it violated the community standards to basically compare Donald Trump to a box of rocks. It was an old Army quote. And really? I just hit the crazy emoji and said, I'll see you in a couple of days. I stand by that. So I actually had one of those little encounters, and I just couldn't believe it. And so I did the blog post for the Times of Israel. I apologize. I didn't mean to call again.
No, it's fine, Tom. You didn't know the rule, and that's really up to our call screener to tell people. But that's fine. So one of the things that people have to understand is that Facebook has brought in a bunch of media organizations to be, quote, fact checkers. There are no liberal media organizations in that list. They don't have Alternet or Raw Story or Daily Kos or any of those groups, but they do have the Daily Caller, which is a right-wing, hardcore right-wing. I mean, just go to Daily Caller's website, dailycaller.com, and look at their headlines. They're hysterical, hardcore right-wing, very often filled with lies.
Really?
And those are the people who are looking at your posts and deciding whether they're acceptable or not. In my opinion, Facebook has become a mild and gentle version of Fox News. It's the velvet glove over the iron fist. They're letting Donald Trump spew lies literally day by day, and yet when Mike Bloomberg tries to say things that are not lies, they're like, whoa, wait a minute, we got to change the rules here. I am very concerned that Mark Zuckerberg has politicized. They knocked me off Facebook for 3 or 4 weeks. And until I started yelling about it on the air and wrote an article saying Facebook should be nationalized, the government should take it over. At that point, they said, okay, you can have your private account back. It really does seriously worry me. And we have a presence on Facebook. We broadcast this show live on Facebook, and we're going to, hopefully next week be broadcasting it live on Twitter as well. We've been working on that. So, but I'm with you, Tom, and we need to be
keep it up.
Concerned about this. Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom. Good to hear from you. Alan in Cedar City, Utah. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Good to talk to you. By the way, I agree Facebook should be some kind of regulated public utility, but that wasn't why I called. Your question about the economy and your comments about who's going to get the blame is just so right on and so timely. Now, I heard on a podcast some progressive guy from the UK whose analysis was that like low-income people, maybe especially minorities, whoever has, who's having the hardest time, that those people are worried about too much change. And so stuff that we, all support, like a single payer, like a Green New Deal, which, of course, is a Keynesian approach that we're going to have to
well, it's not just Keynesian. Single-payer health care is what virtually every developed country in the world has adopted.
Well, yeah. But what do you think of this idea that a lot of people might be worried about too much change, that with the new worries about the economy, that people that might have been all in for Bernie or whatever will get gun-shy and...
Yeah. Well, this is why Elizabeth Warren dialed back her Medicare for All to a 4-year phase-in, and why Pete Buttigieg is saying, Medicare for all who want it. And basically what he is arguing for is just the public option, Obamacare with a public option, which we would have had if it wasn't for Joe Lieberman. He was the one Democratic vote who refused to go for it because he was in bed, he's being funded by the health insurance companies. And the health insurance companies, truth be told, don't want a public option either, and a public option does move us in the right direction. It just doesn't move us there very fast. It provides for another decade or so of multi-billion-dollar a year profits for this small industry of fewer than a dozen companies whose executives are making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and thus can pour some of that money into the coffers of their Republican benefactors. But I'm frankly not worried about rapid change, and I don't think low-income people are either, frankly. I'm guessing low-income people would like a hell of a lot of change very rapidly. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm 57 years old. I didn't even realize until I started looking up myself that, William Barr, he was around during the Warren Commission after the assassination of JFK. I mean, he's been the janitor for the Republicans for quite a while now.
What role did he play with the Warren Commission?
Well, I'm not quite sure what he played a role in as far as what he covered up. But
he wasn't on the commission.
Had his hands. I'm sorry? No, but he had his hands in things at that time. And from that time on, it seemed like every time the GOPs have gotten dirty, he's always there to clean it up.
Yeah, that's his job.
And
that's
I'm
why
wondering
William
if most people under the age,
general.
I'm wondering if people under the age of 50 even know that.
No, they don't. And I'm telling you, people in their 70s don't know that. They don't remember that in 1992, it was Bill Barr who shut down the Iran-Contra investigation. Steve, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's you know, as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for our national healthcare system.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Margaret Butler. Now, you may have heard of the Extinction Rebellion, and I'm going to ask Margaret to tell us a little bit more about it, but she is going, along with four other people, is going on trial in court in Portland Monday morning for an action that the Extinction Rebellion in Portland took that I think you really need to know about, and I think there's also larger issues here. The website is XRPDX, as in Extinction Rebellion Portland, xrpdx.org, and that's also the Twitter handle. It's XR_PDX, and wrong page here. And they're going on trial here on Monday. So Margaret, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Could you start out by telling us what is Extinction Rebellion, where did it come from, and how did the Portland chapter come about?
Sure.
Just real quick.
Extinction Rebellion started in Britain in 2018. At least it burst into public in 2018 when thousands of activists shut down all the bridges in London. And I read about it, and I was really excited that people were saying, this is an emergency. We have to deal with the climate crisis right now. And since that initial action, it's spread across the globe. And the demands of Extinction Rebellion are very simple, that the government must tell the truth about the climate and wider ecological emergency, that the government must enact legally binding policies to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2025, and that instead we demand a citizens' assembly because we don't trust the government to make the bold, swift, long-term changes necessary to get us out of this emergency we're in. And in the U.S., we have a fourth demand, which is a just transition that prioritizes the most vulnerable people and indigenous sovereignty. And sets up reparations and centers Indigenous people, people of color, and poor communities in the work that we do.
So what is it that you and your 4 compatriots with Portland's local branch of Extinction Rebellion, xrpdx.org, what is it that you did that ended you up in jail and now in court? Is this and this is Multnomah County Courthouse? This is a local charge?
That's right. So we actually took 2 actions that launched the Extinction Rebellion chapter here. On April 20th, Easter Sunday morning, 11 of us brought a dump truck load of topsoil and dumped it on the rail yard and railroad tracks at Zenith Energy Corporation. And we built a Victory Over Climate Change garden and brought a tiny house and a scarecrow. And we told the city that we were rezoning the area from industrial park to open space. And we invited the city to join us in this. And the reason we took that action and then came back a week later and did it again is because the city has a policy since 2015 of no new fossil fuel infrastructure, but Zenith, by using an old construction permit owned by the company that was on the space before they were, has gone ahead to move from processing 12 oil train cars at a time to 44. And that hit the news in February of last year. And people in Portland are outraged about it.
So by putting the dirt on the tracks, did you shut down the trains? This was actually a violation of commerce, as it were? Okay.
Yes, we blocked the trains.
So, of course, you were arrested. I think the principal charge against you is criminal trespass.
That's right.
And that's not a small thing. You can go to prison for that. What sort of penalties are you facing, and what sort of a defense are you going to make? I understand you're making an affirmative defense that is not, we didn't do it. So tell us about that.
That's right. That's right. We are making what's known as the necessity defense. We're saying that, and there's a lot of law that says if there is an emergency with imminent harm happening, you can take action to address that emergency and imminent harm, even if it's breaking a law to do so.
Right.
And that's
so. This is like, I mean, and that would be most often used in cases like, a husband driving his pregnant wife who's having contractions to the doctor and speeding. Or from that up to much larger scale things. But how often has that necessity defense been successful, and in what kinds of cases? Do you know?
It has been successful in a number of cases, mostly around. There was a case around nuclear weapons and one around South African protest. In the climate movement, we've had one of the valve turners had a court rule that they should have been allowed to use the necessity defense, and then had the charges dropped against him. And then our own...
You said one of the valve turners? What's that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. There were, I think, 5 or 6 people who... in a coordinated, peaceful, direct action, turned off the valves, turned off all the flow of Alberta tar sands oil into the United States at the same time. They broke in and turned off the valves. And so the one who did it in Minnesota and went to trial in Minnesota had his charges dropped after a court said he should have been allowed to use the necessity defense.
Wow, I'm impressed.
And then Ken Ward, who's going to trial with us, his case went up to an appeals court. The appeals court said the trial judge should have allowed him to use the necessity defense, and he's going back to trial again in May on that.
We just have a minute here before we're going to hit a hard break. To what extent is will the judgment of this, Multnomah County Court be appealable? And if if this goes against you, where do you take it? What do you do next? And also, how can people support you?
I assume that it would be appealable. Whether the prosecutors would decide to do that or not, I don't know. And the way people can support us, they can come to the Multnomah County Courthouse and watch the trial. They can
this
get
is next Monday morning, right?
Yeah, Monday morning, probably through Wednesday.
Mm-hmm. And it opens at 8:30, as I recall.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, the other way is, of course, to get involved in Extinction Rebellion indirect action, because we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah. XRPDX.org is the Portland Extinction Rebellion. What's the general website for Extinction Rebellion overall, Margaret?
It's XRUS.
.org? XRUS.org. Cool. Margaret Butler, an activist with Extinction Rebellion Portland. Good luck, Margaret. Keep us up to date.
Okay, thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Thom Hartmann will be broadcasting live from San Francisco from Real Talk 910. Let's see here. James in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
I don't know if you've seen the story or not about Coffeyville, Kansas.
Fill me in.
There is a news public. It was on CBS and in a couple different stories. But there are people being put in jail in Coffeyville, Kansas, for not paying their health bills.
Oh, people are being put in jail
story.
all over the country for not paying their health bills. The way it works is you don't pay the bill, they get a judgment against you. If you don't show up in court, you get hit with a contempt of court citation, and for that you go to jail. And we've got debtors' prison all over this country, but this is more concerted. Is this one particular radical judge or what?
Yeah, the judge supposedly does not have a law degree. It's quite a story. My daughter passed.
Oh, I read the story about this. Yeah.
And I just didn't know if you were aware of it or not. I was not aware it was that widespread. But
it is widespread.
Incredible.
It's happening in every state in the union.
Well, people should be aware of that because...
Yeah, we have like 1 million people who are in jail without having been convicted of any crime. This is one of the reasons why we need to do away with cash bail. It's something that doesn't exist in most other countries.
Well, and universal health care. And then the other one that I was going to pass along was the Hmong community, which we have here in Wisconsin and also in Minnesota. And there were two articles. There was an article in the St. Paul newspaper about Hmong being deported up there back to a country that they simply don't know the language or anything. I don't know what
these are Laotian refugees or Cambodian?
Yes, they're Laotian and Hmong from the Vietnam War. And
spelled H-M-O-N-G, yeah.
Yeah. And as I was sitting here, I Googled it and I found out that here in Wisconsin, they're also going to try to deport some. And our governor here, Governor Evers, is stepping in. And in Minnesota, in the cities, a congresswoman is also stepping in. But it blows my mind. I mean, this is 50 years ago that the Vietnam War was. And and they obviously came over in regard to that. And how can you send people back for something like that? I understand a person illegally crossing the border, maybe, but This is not.
Well, here's the thing: they're not white Europeans. So this is what Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and Mike Pence want to do. They their slogan is "Make America White Again." They pretend it's "Make America Great Again," but what they mean is "Make America White Again." And there's enough non-white people in this country that they, in addition to closing the door to future ones, they're trying to get rid of the ones who are here. It's just that simple.
Well, I flabbergasted.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you very much for the call. Marta in Big Bear Lake, in Bonnie Lake, Washington? I thought it was Big Bear Lake. Marta?
That's right, Bonnie Lake, Washington, Tom.
Oh, Bonnie
I'm
Lake.
just calling to touch base.
Oh, Marta, I'm sorry, we're hitting the break. Let me put you on right after the break. I wasn't watching my clock closely enough. My apologies. Marta's on line 7, Joyce, and if you can make her available again, I will pick her up right after the break. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS? In our latest video for folks who support our show over at ThomHartmann.com, the saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system, which is already cutting back on Medicaid programs in the red states. You can check it all out over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome. Thom Hartmann here with you broadcasting live from San Francisco. This afternoon, I'm hopping on a plane to Seattle. We'll be doing our show tomorrow morning from the studios, tomorrow and the day after, the studios of KBCS in Seattle. And tomorrow night, Pramila Jayapal and I will be doing a song and dance at the Town Hall. At Town Hall Seattle at 7:30 tomorrow night. And, you can find all the information over at ThomHartmann.com or on KBCS's website, which I believe is kbcs.org, but double check. So let's pick up some phone calls here. Michael in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. Good afternoon. I was just calling up here to briefly report on the Bernie Sanders rally that we had here on Sunday here in Denver. Lot of activity, a lot of energy, and I have to honestly say that Bernie really laid out everything very clearly. Of course, we've got our ballots here. I have my ballot here to put in the mail today. Once I check it off for the Democratic primary. And I honestly have to say, there was way more unity than what we're getting from the commercial news media here, as I like to call it, because that's what they're all about, is selling advertising. And talking to people like myself, I mentioned that the last go around, I supported Bernie when Hillary was named the nominee. I still am trying to grow back my nails from working and digging as hard for her as I did. And I think that there's more people like me or that sympathize with, what we went through than there is the disunity in the party. Not to say, it's politics, but generally speaking, I have to honestly say it's the third time I've seen Bernie. The first time I've seen him this go around and all that. He lays it out very plainly. No big language or anything else. He's just telling you how, in essence.
How many people showed up there in Denver?
I'm going to say probably 10 to 12,000 in that neighborhood, at least. It was at the convention center. So, as a matter of fact, Newsweek had a little item on here. There was some fisticuffs between two people, and they were both escorted out and all. And it was none of this like, where people are itching, to take the person and tar and feather them, hang them up in effigy, like in the Trump rallies and stuff. So there was positive energy. There was discourse. I had my points to make and all that. I'm supporting Bernie and Elizabeth, so I'm going to work for both of them until the smoke clears, and then take the take the person that should cross the finish line, take them and get him or her there. That's what we need to do, is to have that closed ranks, unity. Yeah, we have different issues. He spoke clearly about the economy, health care, and education and stuff. He never once said we're going to have to raise taxes, but in essence what he was saying, and folks, hey, there's 300 million of us that got the shaft last time around with this tax cut. And now, what we have to do is to take back and tell people. I said, I wonder what billionaires are going to do if where are they going to go if things get worse and worse and worse for the vast majority of American people out there. Where are they going to go?
Well, as Franklin Roosevelt said, I have a lot of friends who say that if my tax policies go into effect, they will have to leave America. And I tell you, I will miss my friends. And there was always laughter. Michael, thank you for that. It's great to hear from you, and I appreciate the report. Marta in Bonnie Lake, Washington. Hey, Marta, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just calling about the rally that Bernie Sanders had at the Tacoma Dome in Washington.
When was this?
This was last night, and there were over 17,000 people there. It was rather amazing, peaceful. Mm-hmm. It kind of reminded me of the peace and love rallies that we had back in the 60s and early 70s. Anyway,
yeah, the so-called Bernie bros, the nasty folks, every single one that I've seen on Twitter so far has been somebody who recently joined and has only a few followers, and I think that they're trolls, and frankly, I'm starting to think that they're trolls coming from other countries.
Very possible.
If not from the RNC.
Definitely. I was very pleased to have the Puyallup Tribal Council Chairman David Bean he opened it, and after he opened it, there was a tribute to all of the missing and murdered Native Indians, Native Americans, and it was wonderful. They did some of the speech in the Native language and others, and then English. But the
Bernie
three
is very respectful of Native Americans.
Yes, he is. The three political speakers they had were all female and all women of color. I was so impressed with the whole thing.
Marta, I got to run, but thanks for the report. That's great news.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And before he did that one, he had done one here in the Bay Area because my book signing was competing with us. So he must have just done this one and hopped up there. It's amazing. We'll be right back. Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, No push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Hey, I'm in San Francisco today having a great time. What a beautiful city. I love San Francisco. I spent part of the summer in 1968 here and always thought someday I'd want to move to San Francisco and just never pulled it off. But it's a beautiful sunny day out here. Later this afternoon, I'm going to catch a flight up to Seattle, another beautiful town. And tomorrow night, Wednesday night, I'll be I'll be on stage with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a real rock star, the author of the Medicare for All bill in the House of Representatives. That's the complement to Bernie's one in the Senate. And it's filling up fast. I think the venue holds 1,000 people, and we've got over, I believe it's over 900 tickets have been sold. So you might want to give them a call. These things fill up fast. And then Sunday, February 23rd, next Sunday, I'll be in Minneapolis for the Blue State Ball, and you can get the information there from KTNF's website or from my website. The website, by the way, for KBCS is kbcs.fm. And then Friday the 28th, I'll be in Portland at Powell's Bookstore in the main store, downtown Portland. I'm looking forward to that. And Sunday, March 1st, in Chicago, I'll be at Frugal Muse Books. So at noon, by the way. All the rest of these are 7 or 7:30. Well, actually, the Blue State Ball is going to be at noon, also in Minneapolis. So a lot going on. We're having a great time, and I think it's an important book that I wrote. I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I put a hell of a lot of research into this book, and I think you'll be shocked by many of the things that are contained therein. Tony in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Tony, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. So this gentleman who called earlier today, and he was saying, oh, well, there's no way that a Jewish man will ever become president. And it's like, they said the same thing about Obama. They were like, oh, a black man will never be president. And it's like,
exactly.
Does the guy realize does he realize there's 7.5 million Jewish people in America? So that's the start of it. Yeah. And I think one of the problems is that no one's really talking a lot, as much as they should be on, this channel and a lot of the progressive blogs, really trying to understand, what happened in 2016 with the voter base, why people voted why they did. Everyone's just trying to broad stroke it and say, well, this is what happened. And, really this is going to come down to, two things. And I think Stephanie Miller pointed out that last week or so that Donald Trump essentially needs about 11% more voters to basically take over the popular vote, to basically just, take over forever. And, we seem to keep forgetting that there's 24% Republican, 24% Democrat, and then everybody else is an independent. And independents, they're not just, they lean left or they lean right. Like, the independents are a huge voter bloc that's made up of all these different types of sort of political ideologies. And when you look at all the different candidates, Bernie is the only candidate that really appeals to the largest amount of different types of people in that voter bloc. So
we certainly saw that in the election of 2016, in the primary of 2016, where Bernie overwhelmingly, he won every single county in Wisconsin except one. And a lot of it was the independent vote. He wiped out Michigan. He beat Hillary in West Virginia by more than 30 points, as I recall, certainly more than 20, in the high 20s or low 30s. And we see this over and over again, that Bernie's policies are well known. Bernie is known to be a guy of high integrity. All they can throw at him is this socialist label, and now since either he or his wife inherited a house or a little bit of money and bought a house in Vermont, and the value of the house is over $1 million, and he made $1 million on his book, I guess. And so they're saying, "Oh, he's a millionaire." Come on. It's like, this is all you got?
Because his house, so Jane inherited her family's house in Maine, right? And so they sold it to buy a house on Lake Champlain so it could be closer, that's where all their family is. The photos of this house, I mean, it's a lake cabin that looks like it came out of the 60s. There's nothing luxurious about it. Like, you see it and you're like, yeah, that's Bernie's lake house. You know what I mean? So,
but the property's real valuable. That's the thing, Yeah, but my point is that, there's really, the only argument against Bernie Sanders, the only argument that has any integrity is when people say, we really like this system where the lobbyists give us a lot of money and give us trips and give us free lunches, and we pass legislation on their behalf. We want to keep that system in place. And if they would just be honest about it, because Bernie wants to blow that up, as does Elizabeth Warren. But because they find that doesn't really win elections to say that, to say, well, I'd like to continue to be able to take millions of dollars from people in wine caves and stuff, because you can't really say that. They come up with these BS arguments. I don't know if you saw what John Oliver called, I'm getting into circular firing squad stuff here. But the way that the Republicans are going to be going after Bernie, if Bernie is the nominee, is going to be, oh, he's a socialist, oh, he's a millionaire, oh, he's an elitist, and we all know that that's just nonsense. So, but yeah, I agree with you. I think that our first Jewish president. You said it's like Obama being black. And I've told the story a million times on this show. During the Obama-Hillary primary in 2008. I had on one of the top guys in the California Democratic Party. He was the vice something of something, and he was black. He was an African American. He was very outspoken African American, very progressive. And he came on and he said, I'm encouraging people to vote for Hillary Clinton rather than Barack Obama. And I'm like, why? And he's like, because I'm a black man and I know how bad discrimination is. I know how intense racial hatred is in this country. I know what the white supremacists are all about. I know how, even average white people in the United States, even if they think they're not racist, they're harboring racist, ideas deep down inside. And he said, I just don't think America will ever elect a black man. And then on top of that, his middle name is Hussein. And how is that even going to be possible? So, he says this stuff and then the primaries happened and Bernie swept them and boom, Obama, and boom, Obama is the candidate and he wins the election. I agree with you. I don't think Bernie's Judaism is going to be used against him in a way that's going to influence anybody other than the anti-Semitic white supremacists, and we don't have them anyway.
Right. Exactly. And the biggest thing that we're going to have to worry about is this. If Bernie gets, call it 42% of the delegates at the DNC, and then whoever's second gets, 30-something, if the super delegates vote in the second round for the lesser person, you're going to get the Trump again. And it sucks, and I really wish that wasn't the case, but it's just the way it's going to be. The amount of people that support Bernie that aren't hardcore Democrats, they're going to be like, oh, system screwed again, so I'm praying.
Right, and people are starting to ask the question. I've seen 2 or 3 reporters now. In fact, even one of the, I think it was Jake Tapper on CNN last weekend, or the weekend before last, I guess. This last weekend I was on the road and I didn't catch it. Was asking some, fairly high up Democratic politicians who are superdelegates, will you support, because right now, in order to win the nomination on the first round, you have to have a majority. You have to have over 50%. But a plurality is where you've got a bunch of people You've got so many candidates that nobody's going to get 50%, but somebody does get a lot more votes than everybody else. The plurality is the person who gets the most votes, even when there's not a majority by anybody. And so his question was, will you support giving the nomination to the person who wins the plurality on the first ballot? And a number of people are saying, yeah, I'm open to that. And I think that needs to be the case, more often. And it would be a good thing. Tony, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Heather in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Heather, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm thinking about how the Democratic Party is letting us down again in their messaging. The candidates have their messages. Bernie has his social reform, Medicare for all, and it makes sense to people that can really understand the economic impact to themselves. But people that can't see past taxes being raised and what that's going to mean for their own bottom line need it broken down in a Sesame Street, not to be condescending, but in a Sesame Street section so they can understand how
people
their
are busy.
bottom
They
line
don't have the
is gonna be
time to
affected.
understand complex things.
So as much as people like Bernie, they like him for what he has always stood for and what he promises, but they need to understand how that's going to work for them in order for him to be voted for. The Blue Dog Democrats and the people that are very bottom line motivated rather than social reform motivated need that to be convinced. And I wish the Democratic Party as a whole would send out messaging campaigns to help educate people so that they do understand that higher taxes doesn't mean you're going to have less money. It means you're going to have less money going out for your premiums. You're just still
The
going to
way
have
it's going to work, Heather, is if Bernie becomes the nominee, then the Democratic Party will begin doing that. They're not going to do it right now because it would be perceived as taking a
I wish
position.
the candidates would do it now, too, though. I mean, the debate.
Well, I think Bernie is simplifying this a lot. But I get these emails from Third Way, and from No Labels that are just trashing,
You're
Bernie
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And these are corporate Democrat groups, and they just horrify me. I mean, it's so sad. Heather, thank you for the call. Your point is well taken. And welcome back. Jim in Sacramento watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to, it's good to come in at the end of the show because I'm really talking about something you had before, which is how the Democrats seem to fall into a trap of preparing the economy or the plate for the Republicans to take over. In other words, the Republicans destroy the economy and then the Democrats come in and repair it and then give it back to the Republicans. The ratio that reveals what's going on is the ratio between national debt versus the GDP. So you can correct the situation by paying down the debt, of course, with an austerity program, which is the threat, okay? But you can also change that ratio by inflating the economy. In other words, doing the things that are not now being done to expand the economy. And that plays into the
You're talking about like a massive
agenda.
infrastructure program.
Yes. In other words, right now here in this little town of Sacramento, we supposedly have 5,000 homeless people. And it might cost $50 million to build single occupancy residential housing specifically for the homeless. And I'm not saying I know that's a fact. Seattle and many cities are dealing with it and have much more advanced programs than I'm trying to tell you. But that's an area where you could throw many, many $1 billion directly into the economy of each one of those cities. And it reflects the employment, it stimulates growth, and each dollar that's spent circulates around, and there is a multiplier. All those Keynesian things apply. However, if you just manipulate things by bringing up or down the interest rate or hiding the debt, which is what Trump is doing right now, the program that came in like around 2012 was quantitative easing, where the Federal Reserve bought the debt and didn't even sell it. So that effectively
Right, they bought
lowered
bonds,
interest rates.
took them off the market.
Now, what Trump is doing is paying that kind of money into the overnight funds. Okay, there's $600
the repo market.
to $700 billion financed, which normally would have been quantitative easing. In other words, they put it on the books of the Federal Reserve, but instead they're buying 2-week and 30-day notes. Can you imagine that?
And the effect is the
of
same.
The country is being financed on short-term money now.
Yeah.
All you have to do is unload it.
It's absolutely
and
unprecedented.
This economy freezes
it's never
up.
been done before.
I'm sorry? Yeah, what he's doing is totally unique. I called you about that on, I think it was November 18th, and at the time I was pointing you out that China is no longer buying U.S. debt, and that was what stimulated the overnight borrowing. I knew it was China because of the extent of the money hitting the economy. Now that has developed into short-term money.
Right. Yeah, it's what these guys have done with this financialization of our economy is they have created a train wreck, and the trains are moving toward each other at 100 miles an hour each, but they're still about a mile apart. And I'm not optimistic about what's going to happen when they get a lot closer. And I don't think they can slow this thing down. Jim, thanks for the call. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jennifer in Stillwater, Minnesota, listening on KTNF, AM 950 there in Minneapolis. Hey, Jennifer, I'll be there next weekend. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the Nevada caucuses, but first I'll just say something, too, since you were talking about Bernie's little house on the Lake Champlain. I also wanted to throw in, for anybody who hears people talking about Bernie's honeymoon in 1988 to the Soviet Union and how he's a communist and all that, the truth on that is that that was an official delegation from the mayor's office of Burlington, Vermont, and that was their sister city. Bernie had established a sister city program, and Yaroslav, Russia, is just outside of Moscow, and so they were just on a sister city trip. It had nothing to do with, of course, Bernie being a communist. Also,
and it was
everyone,
not his honeymoon. It was just around that time.
Exactly. And then also with the socialist thing, you know, they called Obama a socialist every single day. Every single day they called Obama a socialist.
Well, and let's be clear. Bernie also, and he talked about this on this show years ago. He he called the Soviet Union a tyranny, a dictatorship. Exactly. And in fact, he said, people say they're left wing, and they give everybody health insurance, but it was Stalin ran that country like an absolute screaming dictator. He murdered millions and millions of people, and they put them in the gulags. And Bernie's right up front about that.
Exactly. I mean, we can't listen to Republican lies.
They try to distort him. Yeah.
Because Republicans lie, and they said that Obama was going to put people in re-education camps, FEMA re-education camps. Remember that? Yeah, so, they lie. But I was just going to mention, Stephanie Miller was talking about the early voting in Nevada, and actually it's the fourth day already, so it's almost over. But it was alarming because, and I looked up what she was reading from here on the Nevada 2020 website, and it says all early vote participants are required to make 3 presidential preference choices. So it's like ranked choice voting. And so everybody needs to make sure that they do, in fact, put 3 on there. You're required to. And, Stephanie...
Well, my understanding is if you only vote for one, then your ballot is considered spoiled. It doesn't get counted.
Yeah, that's what Stephanie said, and I was alarmed that they're going to throw your ballot away if you don't put a choice 2 and 3. So make sure if you're in Nevada and you're early voting to put 3 choices down, because you do not want your ballot to get thrown away just because you didn't put a choice 2 and 3. And that's different than, I think that's different than normal ranked choice voting, because in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we've had ranked choice city elections since 2011, and I don't think they throw your ballot away if you just put one choice.
No, they don't.
But, yeah,
they don't.
So,
it's just
anyway.
that you don't have, if your preferred candidate doesn't get a vote, then your vote has just vanished into the space, as opposed to going to your second choice. That's all. But yeah, apparently that's how they're running it in Nevada, and that is a concern. And I read a good story about that this morning, and I think you're spot on. Jennifer, thanks for the shout out, or for the for letting people know about this. Thanks for informing us. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. Paul in Seattle. Hey, Paul, what's up? Coming to your town tonight.
Hi, how are you?
I am great, but I'll get better. How about you?
Okay, good. Thank you very much for taking my call. I appreciate it. I've listened to you for the past 20 years, and man, I'm getting old, Tom. Man. Anyway,
welcome to the club.
I do have to say that I was listening to Kyle Kalinske the other day, and he said one of the major things that Trump's going to get us on is the health care that will be available, Medicare for all, and I totally and completely agree with that. But it'll also be for undocumented humans crossing the southern border. Again, I agree with that. However, he's going to be running it that way and saying it's a bad thing, that Bernie Sanders is for open borders. I know he's not, but he's also going to be giving free health care to these people crossing the border. Could you go into detail on what his Medicare for all plan would be dealing with that, and get these myths out of the way?
This is just common sense, Paul, and people need to be pushing back on this aggressively. Here's the situation. I was in England, and my daughter got an ear infection, and we called the local surgery, and the doctor came over to our house and gave her some amoxicillin and fixed her ear infection. Every country in the world, there was another country I was sick in, I don't recall where it was now, where, it was Australia. I got terrible food poisoning, and in fact, I got a Giardia infection in Australia up on the Lockhart River. And I went into the local clinic, and they saw me immediately, and they gave me antibiotics, and the whole thing cost $25, and that was for the pills. And the reason why countries that have national health care systems treat people who are not their citizens, and very often, in most cases, do it for free, is because if I had been walking around Australia spreading Giardia, or if my daughter had been walking around the United Kingdom, if an ear infection was contagious, spreading what she had, it's a public health problem. If you've got somebody here in the United States who came from Mexico without documentation, and that person's got tuberculosis, or coronavirus or something, God forbid, and they're sitting next to you on the bus, and they're sick because they don't have access to health care, you're the one who's going to get screwed. And so covering everybody in a country, whether they're a citizen or not, with health care is simply a matter of national security in the context of health care. It's only common sense. To say that we should give health care to American citizens and not give health care to people who aren't American citizens is setting us up for epidemics. It's setting us up for a public health disaster. It's just common friggin' sense. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be in Seattle tomorrow night, Seattle Town Hall. Check it out at kbcs.fm or tomhartmann.com. Thanks so much for being with us today, and thanks again to AM 910, Real Talk in San Francisco, iHeartRadio, for hosting me here. They've been wonderful, the folks here, and look forward to talking to you tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Tag you're it. Get out there, get active, share it with your friends how to find progressive radio, and support your progressive media and Free Speech TV and everybody else.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.